What's up, guys? My name is Jacob Sermon. Today's project, we're making a Viking themed axe. This is a fun project. It actually involved a lot more woodworking than I'm used to. It turned out to be great. My dad's an expert woodworker, so being able to consult him and kind of do parts of this project together turned out to be really, really fun. I like the way it turned out. It's pretty rewarding altogether. So we'll keep this introduction short and jump right to the video. Appreciate it. So what we have here is an old axe I bought off OfferUp, and what I'm using here is a wire disc and then a flap disc, kind of removing some of that rust to see what I'm working with here. Next step is going to be removing the old handle. So I'm going to cut small holes out to remove the initial divider and then switch to a bigger drill bit to remove as much material as I can. This process took a lot longer than I actually thought it would, but it was a good learning process. Now with the handle out, I'm going to begin to sketch out my design. I'm going with a Viking-themed Bearded Viking Axe here. The bearded refers to that interior curve on the bottom side, kind of making it look like a beard. I'll switch to an angle grinder here with a cutting disc to cut out those curves and then use a grinding disc to smooth them out. You'll see here that the width of the axe is actually greater than the diameter of the cutting disc, so I'll have to switch to a saw to cut that part out. Now here you can kind of see me grinding that, using a grinder disc to smooth out that interior curve of the bearded part, and then round out the backside of this axe. Then what I'm using is a grinding disc to grind out the deep divots caused by rust. Then I'll switch to a flap disc and smooth that out. You see kind of the chunkiness, and then you can see that smooth finish from the flap disc. We'll use a Dremel to get that last bit. Now I'm using a beechwood handle, and we're ripping a board, which means we're cutting it the vertical length of the board. This leaves me with a nice piece of wood here, and I'm going to cut it a little bit longer than the original design and give me some wiggle room. I'm going to hop over to the chop saw and cut that down. And then what we're going to use is a planer. Now what the planer does is it cuts it completely 90 degrees on two sides, which is what we're going to do as a good reference point. Later on I can use that on a bandsaw to make sure it rests flat with the tabletop. Then on this piece of wood I'm going to sketch out my particular design. I kind of like that curved arc shape in the handle. It makes it feel a little bit more usable and also powerful. Then we're going to switch to the bandsaw using that side we planed face down. It's going to remain level on that table. We're going to cut out this shape. With the shape cut down, I need to trim down the width a little bit. It's a pretty thick piece of wood. You want it to fit comfortably in your hand. So I'm going to cut that down, but I'm going to leave the very bottom of it a little bit wider, kind of a bulb shape. So I can kind of round that off to make a little bit of a stopping blunt force part at the end of the handle. Again, we're going to hop to the bandsaw to do this. Now, each of these sides is going to be at 90 degrees right now, so we're going to use a router. My dad and I are just switching out a router bit right now to get the biggest radius possible to help speed up and reduce as much hand setting as I'll use later on. So what we're doing here is just we're routing these edges to make it a little bit more circular. This is kind of what we have right now. It's getting there. Now I'm going to use a sander here, kind of smooth out these edges, kind of get it down. And now I'm using an 80 grit flap disc on the angle grinder to kind of shape that bulb and then really round out those routes we did earlier. Then we'll switch to an oscillating disc sander with a 220 grit sandpaper to kind of smooth this and finish up the grip part of the handle. Now at the top of the handle, what I'm doing here is I'm finding the center, and I have a previous sketch here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch around exactly the interior design of the top of the axe. And what we're going to do is we're going to end up cutting this all down, and then we'll be able to slot and fit this axe head on top of it. Then we'll measure the depth of this axe, and then measure that same depth onto my handle so I can cut this down. And as you'll see later, I'm going to chisel down these pieces, so when I chisel it down, the chips just fall off really nice and easily. This process is tough. So what I'm doing is I'm chopping off and chiseling down these excess pieces of wood, and also filing, and then after every so many strokes I have to make sure and test it to make sure it fits perfectly. Then I'll use a Dremel and finish up that exterior curve so it fits flush. Now this is kind of a fun artistic part of it. What I did here is I got a Celtic design and then used paper with a carbon transfer paper as a backup, and I traced it on the piece of wood, and what the carbon paper does, like you see here, is it perfectly transfers it to the piece of wood. Then I'll get a Dremel with a wood carving bit, and I'll trace out this design and then carve the entirety of it. It's pretty sweet, but now to make it pop a little bit more, I'm going to use a wood burner and trace out the exterior of these designs. This is the actual speed, but I'll speed it up so you don't have to watch the entire thing. I do this on both sides, and I think the wood burning really just makes it pop all together. Now this is the axe head. I'm going to trace out the outline of this so I can get it on a piece of paper and then design, whatever design I want to be on the actual axe head. Here I found another kind of cool Celtic looking design, and what I'm doing here is I can kind of see through the paper if I tape it on the table, and I'll trace that out onto the piece of paper that's the exact size of my axe head. And again, using that carbon paper, I'm going to trace it onto the axe head. I'll get some spray paint here that's white. It shows up better using the carbon paper than it would be if I try to trace it right onto the silver metal. So here I'm just tracing this out, and then I'll peel off that carbon paper, and you can see how that design transfers onto the metal axe head. Now this process, I can't say was fun. I'm using a metal cutting bit here, and this is about as fast as I had to go. It probably took about 3 hours, I'd say, maybe each side. It wasn't a fun process, but I think it was really rewarding, and it adds a nice touch to the whole overall piece of work. After I'm done that, I use some acetone on a paper towel, and that just clears off that paint right away. You can kind of see the design kind of popping here. I'll end up polishing this axe head a little bit more so it shows up better. Now with the axe handle done, I'm using kind of a mahogany wood stain here. I'm gonna rub it on thick and then use a paper towel to wipe it all off, and I'll leave a nice dark brown finish. To seal this in, I'm using a polyurethane finish, which will reduce the sweat or anything like that, rubbing off that stain. Now at the top of the handle, I'm gonna drill a hole through the top of this handle, so that way when I cut the notch or the slot down the middle, it doesn't want to keep splitting down the entirety of the shaft. It kind of twists up those wood grains, that way it doesn't give it a clear finish. Then I'm gonna get a different piece of wood. I'm gonna sand down a wedge. What I'm gonna do with this wedge, I'm gonna drive it into that slot just made inside the axe handle, which will widen it and make it really, really tight. So some glue on here, I'm gonna tap it in. You have to be firm and gentle, but not too hard. You don't want to crack or risk splitting the handle or the wedge you just made. Once it dries, you're gonna clean up and cut off that flush with the top of the axe handle, and then you're gonna stain it the same color as the rest of the handle, and you're about done, man. I think all in all, this is a great, really fun project. I never made an axe before, so it was rewarding and a lot of learning going into this, but the wood carving and the metal carving were really fun. It was fun woodworking. My dad's a great woodworker, so being able to go and do a project with him was fun. So hope you enjoyed. Thanks.